you're all aware, we in through this platform, we always endeavor to, bring topics and themes of relevance. We want to address issues that are really important in the current scenario for you as educators and teachers. And so we've really been striving in this direction. And it's best when we get inputs from you and hear from you as to what really interests you, what is really important, what you find challenging, so that we can come up, together with solutions when we talk about it and deliberate on those issues. So we've several times sent Google Form surveys, and we've constantly asked you for your inputs. And thank you so much, because we've received quite a few, suggestions for topics to be addressed on this platform from quite a few of you, and thank you very much for that. And today we have taken up one of those topics that has come from you, which is, I'm sure all of you know through the posters and the invites that have been out on social media. For today, it is artificial intelligence. And so today, of course, we have as a panelist, Dr. Sarabjot Singh Anand, who is very well accomplished in this field. So I will, in a little bit, I'll be introducing him to you in a little more detail. But before that, we would like to hear your voice now. And I would request Annette to give you the link for a Mentimeter slide. And we would like to hear from you as to what is it that really comes to your mind when you hear the term artificial intelligence. So what strikes you first and foremost? What comes into your head when you hear the word artificial intelligence? So Annette, yes, Neha has put up a link on the chat. We request you to go on to this page, Mentimeter page, copy paste this link or click on this link and you will be taken to that page, and please put your inputs there.
Annette, then will you be sharing the screen? Yes.
Yeah, there are a few inputs there I can see. Robotics, automatic, ethics. That's interesting. Can we have a few more responses? Yeah, there are a few inputs there I can see. Robotics. A working robo. Okay. It is not human intelligence. Anything you understand beyond your limits. I think that's really very interesting. I think Sarab, something which is beyond your limits, if AI can do something beyond limits. All right, that's an interesting thought. All right. So yes, of course. So, if you really, I'm just going to list a few things from our daily life now. Say the maps and navigation. When we go out, we use the Google Maps. We do a lot of bank e-payments. E-payment is what we do now, and especially more so in the last 1.5 years, we have not really visited banks. Everything has gone online. Our facial recognition by our devices. Then, when you type a document, the autocorrect or the spell check, right? Then also Alexa and Siri, who are our virtual assistants. You just say something, voice command, and they do it for you. And of course, our very own Arogya Setu app. And how countries have been predicting the number of cases that are COVID cases that are going to be coming up next week, when, or maybe the next month, or when is it going to peak? Okay, so what is common to all of this? Of course, these are all a part of our daily life. That is, of course, one thing common. But the other very important common thing with all of these is they are all working on artificial intelligence, right? So, and it's totally invaded our lives. There's no doubt about it. Without even knowing, we have artificial intelligence around us. So, and very appropriately, our NEP 2020 has acknowledged that this is extremely important. And, and especially for the 21st century skills, if we want our young learners to become prepared for the future, then we have to impart these skills and technical knowledge. And so NEP has really very profoundly emphasized that this has to be a part of the curriculum. Artificial intelligence has to be, and also design thinking has to be a part of school curriculum as well as the college curriculum. So for the school children, especially, they have, recommended digital literacy, coding, computational thinking, logical thinking. And for the college or the undergrad, at the undergrad level, they have suggested something like, big data analysis, 3D machining and stuff like that. So this has become extremely important. So now, again, we would like to hear from you as to what are some of the questions that are there in your mind. Now, as we reopen schools in most of the states, schools are under different levels of reopening. Some schools have just reopened for the senior students. Some of them are thinking of reopening for the younger ones as well. And most states are really mulling on about this because we have to now reopen schools. And along with that is the implementation of NEP. The government is really now pushing us to implement NEP. So as we do this, and when NEP is saying that artificial intelligence education in schools and colleges is extremely important, what are some questions that come to your mind around artificial intelligence as educators and school leaders? So I would once again request Neha and Annette to give you the link. Some very pertinent questions there, Sarah. It's about equity. How can we use it equitably? Is it important that everybody learns coding now? Okay, how can we use artificial intelligence, especially in teaching mathematics? There's a very specific question related to math. How can I use it in my classroom? What are the pitfalls? Will AI really replace humans in the near future? That's really scary, of course, but that's a very, pertinent question that comes to our mind. Okay, thank you so much. I think some very, very, pertinent and very important questions coming up there. We will try and address that. I'm sure, Sarab, you can have your conversation around these questions. And so let me now go on to introducing Sarab before I hand it over to him. Dr. Sarabjot Singh Anand has been involved in the field of machine learning since the early 1990s, having worked on developing algorithms, applying them to real-world problems, and training a host of data scientists in the capacity of being an academic and an entrepreneur. He has published over 90 academic papers on machine learning, when he was the associate professor at the University of Warwick and previous academic posts in the United Kingdom. He has used these algorithms to develop solutions in areas as diverse as pay-per-click optimization, recommender systems, prognostic models for chronic illnesses, diver monitoring using CAN bus data, cross-selling and upselling products in financial, retail, churn prediction, house price prediction for the telecoms, financial, retail, automotive, manufacturing, and public sector. That's quite a diverse area, so many areas. Sarab, that's really wonderful. His first startup in Ireland won the European IST Prize amongst other technology accolades. Dr. Anand moved back to India in 2012 and co-founded Tatras Data. In 2018, he co-founded Sabut Foundation in Mohali in Punjab to train engineering students in machine learning and to work on social problems in education, farming, governance, and healthcare. And our Adhyayan software, the Adhyayan Way, which is used for our school review, was also designed and crafted by Sarabjot Singh Anand for Adhyayan. Thank you so much, Anand, for now today being with us, taking out time and coming over onto this platform to have a conversation with us. Thank you so much. Now over to you. So I would like to start by asking you, what is artificial intelligence and why has it become so important today?
Thank you, Jayashree, firstly for the introduction and the invite to be here today. It's always daunting to come and speak to real educators like yourselves rather than a part-time one like me. So as far as artificial intelligence is concerned, and I think some of the comments that were made are spot on. Back in the 1950s, after the World Wars, as mathematicians and computer scientists started thinking about what can you do with machines other than do code breaking or apply them to large scientific problems. Alan Turing, one of the trailblazers in this space, who was a mathematician based out of England, came up with the idea that wouldn't it be wonderful to take this, what is really a large calculator, and make it behave more like humans and do things that we inherently find very simple as humans to do. For example, perceiving our world, diagnosing what we should do or deciding on what actions we should take based on our perceptions, and do those actions in such a way that we are optimizing our gain through that interaction with our environment. Right, and that's really what we refer to as cognition, right? Being aware of your space, being able to make inferences from what you're learning about your space, and taking actions as a result. And so it may come as a surprise to some, but it was actually in the early 1950s, a couple of decades before I was born, that people had actually started thinking about how do we make what are really dumb machines behave more like humans, right? And of course, as humans, we always believe that we are the most intelligent beings on the planet. So rather than going for trying to make a machine more like a cat, the thought was, let's go for the highest possible form of intelligence. So from that thought process that Alan Turing had in 1956. There was the first conference talking about how we can create intelligence within computers. And at that time, I would suggest that even now we don't really understand how human intelligence works. But at that time, definitely there was very little insight into how human intelligence works. And so, being mathematicians, they started thinking about, hey, let's use logic as a way of getting computers to do what would be considered to be reason. And of course, humans are terrible at logic. So it wasn't really, something that was ever really going to work. Decided to realize that if there is one certain thing about the world, it's uncertainty. And so let's start thinking in terms of modeling the universe or the world around us using probability theory. because again, they are mathematicians. And of course, we are terrible at maths, right? Most humans are not very fond of the subject. And then, of course, there were some people that started thinking about, well, let's try and mimic what seems to work, right, in the natural world. And so some folks started looking at, can we model the human brain in some way? And the early work that was being done by neuroscientists and cognitive scientists at the time, can we actually start modeling the brain? And from that comes this term neural networks, which is getting very popular, right? And we are all partially fearful of these neural networks that are going to take over the universe and destroy all of us. And on the other hand, we can see that there are great applications of neural networks that we are using on a daily basis, right? When we switch on Netflix today, we get recommended, shows and movies. That's happening using machine learning and artificial intelligence. You rightly pointed out that when we have face recognition happening, right, we can unlock our phones now by just looking at it. That's also, recent advances in artificial intelligence that are allowing us to do that. And neural networks are behind a lot of these advances that have been taking place. Others have tried to look at this whole evolutionary process, and can we optimize computers' decision-making power by modeling evolution, or modeling how ant colonies seem to kind of organize themselves. And one of the things that Alan Turing had said in the very early days was that he believed that the human brain was essentially like a digital computer, right? And as kids, we basically have a very disorganized digital computer that starts to, through interaction with their environment, starts to learn things and creates organization within that digital computing device that is our brain, right? And so there are some very interesting kind of things that have been done in artificial intelligence to really try and make computers, like you said, speak to us or to understand what we say, and consume images and be able to make conclusions that even humans find difficult. For example, medical doctors or radiologists that are looking at X-ray images. We know that there is a certain amount of variance in what one radiologist can read from an image and another one can. So if we can get computers to do it consistently, that's a win in itself, right? Mm-hmm. And so we've made some very nice strides in that area as well, to be able to extract information from images. And natural language, which is confusing to most human beings as well. We've actually made some pretty decent strides in artificial intelligence to be able to understand natural language, as you can see with the likes of Siri and so on. So it's an interesting time to be alive, because what has changed in the last 10 years and why AI has become so popular is the fact that we have a lot more digital data available to us, right? And social scientists have always had theories that they've not been able to prove because they didn't have data. Because of Facebook and Instagram, now we have a lot of social interaction data available. They can actually start using that data. But at the same time, of course, artificial intelligence algorithms can start using that data to make their own conclusions. And we are seeing certain negative aspects of artificial intelligence. And somebody had mentioned ethics. I think ethics is very, very important. What can you do with the data that you are getting access to, right? And so these are very interesting questions that are unanswered, and we all need to be looking at these questions to really figure out what is the right way that we use this very powerful technology that is now available and has come to a point where it is rivaling human beings in certain areas, right? In our capability of doing certain things. We've seen amazing breakthroughs. A couple of years ago, for example, computers, artificial intelligence managed to beat the world champion of Go, which is a very complex strategy game compared to chess. And we all remember when Gary Kasparov lost to IBM's, chess playing machine. But of course, that chess playing machine was actually algorithmic, and it was doing a lot of number crunching and being able to see in the future of where the game would proceed and make decisions based on that. In a way, it was cheating, right? But it was taught a lot of chess as well prior to working, or playing Gary Kasparov. With this AlphaGo, which was the algorithm that beat the world champion of Go, it wasn't taught any of the rules. It learned through simulation and beat the world champion. And the world champion actually, in his comment after losing, said, last year, I could understand the moves that artificial intelligence was making. And I was able to at least figure out why it was making those moves. The moves this time were godlike. I couldn't make out why he was making the moves, and therefore didn't know how to deal with this scenario, right? So a lot has changed in the last decade, 15 years. Things have really kind of come a long way.
Okay. So yeah, so in that sense, it's really powerful. What are some ways in which artificial intelligence as of now has been used in education itself? Because we hear about a lot of these courses, adaptive courses. We hear about also a lot of assessment tools have been, designed on artificial intelligence. If you could throw a little light on us, because, we have educators and school leaders here. Yeah.
Sure. Again, the desire to use artificial intelligence in education goes back again to probably the 1960s, right? I personally have always found that teaching in a physical space is very, very challenging. And of course, you're all better at it than I am, but standing in front of a class of 160 people teaching at Warwick, for example, right? You knew that there were all sorts of abilities and interest of students within the subject you're trying to teach. And you really have only one wavelength to beam down to them at, right? Or beam up to them, as it would be, because the students were sitting at a higher level than I was when I was lecturing to them. But of course, every student has a different wavelength, and we need to really get to them in a way that they can understand the subject. And I always felt that we were failing them in the physical space, because we would really be saying, okay, I only have one wavelength to beam at, so I'll beam out at the average student level, right? And of course, we know that there is no such thing as an average student. There are either students that are lagging behind in their understanding and have misconceptions that are important to understand what we're explaining, or there are those that already know what we are talking about, right? And so you're either boring half the class and losing the other half, or you're really unable to kind of keep the attention of all of the students. And I think I always felt that computers, in that sense, and learning digitally has the advantage that we should be able to create a different learning path for every child, which I think is very difficult for unless you have a very small teacher to student ratio, right? And I think what is interesting is that while people were maybe flirting with artificial intelligence to some extent within education, like you said, there's this whole adaptive assessment kind of idea and so on. When COVID hit and suddenly everybody was forced to go online, we started to realize the problems that exist in teaching this way, right? And while we for the last maybe 10 years had companies like Coursera, or maybe a little longer than 10 years now, and edX that had been democratizing access to good content. We all know that completion rates there are like 3 to 5%, right? And clearly there is more to education than just providing content. And so what we have been doing in Sabudh is experimenting with this, because we also used to bring in physically a bunch of around 30, 35 students into our Mohali center and teach them artificial intelligence and machine learning. And then when COVID hit, we had to go online. And in many ways, it was wonderful, because we actually started to get students, not just from the local area. We started getting students as far as Nigeria and New Zealand and Canada and the States and Germany and all of those kinds of countries. involved. And that in itself, I think, was wonderful because it meant students were getting interactions they wouldn't have otherwise had, right? And that's got nothing to do with artificial intelligence. It's just the fact that we've gone digital. And even in my own kids' school, they go to the British school here in Delhi, and the avenues it opened for the school, right, to engage with people in different countries, to engage with students working together, where they would, maybe once or twice in a year get together, otherwise in a physical space, that could become a longer collaboration that was taking place, right? But there are also dangers with having lots of students suddenly dealing with each other digitally. We know of bullying in classrooms. What about cyberbullying? We know it's a problem, right? And so, one of the things that we looked at early on was to say, if we create these platforms that are secure, that we know who's coming onto the platforms and they're engaging with each other, can we monitor those platforms in some way, right? To be able to identify when conversations are getting toxic, right? And be able to mediate at that point. And of course, for doing that, because we have so much data flowing among students, it would be impossible to do it manually. And so to do it algorithmically, on the other hand, with the advances that have taken place in natural language processing, we can do that, right? So that was one of the things that we started because we felt that collaboration with, peer-to-peer collaboration is very important in learning, and will give students much more. So we brought in some of these little pieces of artificial intelligence to monitor those and make sure that we can create a safer environment for students interacting. One of the other things that we did with digital teaching, online teaching, was we started recording all of our videos, our sessions, and making them available to students. And then what we did was we started to build algorithms that would extract the voice from the teaching session and analyze that voice, convert it to text, analyze the text, and to understand what topics were being discussed in those live sessions. And we built a kind of a search capability on top of that, so that whenever a student asked a question, we could actually not only provide them with similar questions that had been asked previously by other students on the platform and associated answers that had been given by their peers, but we were also able to identify sessions of teaching that were related to the question, and were able to get them to jump straight into that video at that point, so that they could, rather than having to scan an hour-long video, jump into the relevant piece and understand what is happening there. So that's another example of how artificial intelligence was very useful, right? So one is, not every student will frame the question exactly the same way, right? And so it's not an exact match of saying, the student is asking, how do I factorize a number, right? Students will use different vocabulary. Now, how do we actually get this vocabulary, the differences in vocabulary, to be understood by the computer to say this is the same question inherently, right? And I always give the example of, if I'm talking about artificial intelligence and if Shashi Tharoor was talking about it, most people would think we were talking about completely different topics, right? And but the advantage that we have now with artificial intelligence is that we've actually been able to go beyond the words and understand the semantics behind the words and understand what is actually being discussed. And so once we get to that level of understanding, we are able to say that one question is very similar to another question. And if you think about it, that's how our Siri and our Cortana on Microsoft work, right? We don't necessarily have to ask the question according to their language. And this is huge, right? And really, we've only managed to do this recently, right? In terms of technology, in the last 7 to 8 years, this has happened. Another area is automatic translation. right? So we've gone to Google Translate, for example. And maybe a decade ago, if you had gone to Google Translate and used an English sentence and translated it to French, copied the French sentence and then put that into Google to say, can you give me the English translation? You get a different sentence to what you had actually put in, right? But now that doesn't happen. The quality of translation is better. With Indian languages, of course, we still have that problem, because in Europe and in the Western world, they have invested a lot of time in creating data sets, right? And these data sets that are actually called parallel corpuses that say, this is English, this is French for that English. And if we think about why this data is important, let's look at how humans learn, right? A child goes out into the garden, hears a noise over their head, looks up and sees something flying over the head, doesn't know what it is, so it points at it and says goo goo gaga, because he doesn't know what to say, right? And there's a teacher there as a sibling, older sibling, or a mother that's going to say, or father going to say, well, that's a plane, right? And at that point, what's happening is that the child is creating a parallel corpus of what they've just heard from the parent or the sibling, and what they are capturing through the sensors, which are their eyes, right? So there's an image and they've associated a concept with that image. And now they have that relationship, that association that's been built. And of course, a few days later, the child goes out again and sees something flying over their head and points at it and says aeroplane, at which point every Indian parent has a nervous breakdown, right? Because it's a bird. And how is this child ever going to get into IIT and do whatever they wanted them to do if this dumb child can't make the difference out between an aeroplane and a bird, right? And of course, along with the slap that they get across their face, they also are told that's a bird, right? And so now what the child is doing is it's distinguishing between those two images, and is able to discriminate between them and is extracting certain features, right, from both of these images, and realizes that the wings of a plane don't flap, for example, right? And has now created a definition that says if the wings flap, it's a bird, and if the wings don't flap, it's an aeroplane, right? And we are learning concepts, generalization. So we are doing the same thing here. To computers, our sensors for computers are data, right? We are collecting data through our eyes, we are collecting data through our ears as humans, through our tongue, our skin, right? For a computer, you either have what are called IoT devices now, these sensors that you can, deploy, or cameras that are, collecting data. But essentially, it comes down to the fact that data is very, very important for learning. And just as humans use data, computers need the data too. And unfortunately, in India, we have not put in the effort. Despite, the billions that we are in population, if you go to Wikipedia, which has been a source for a lot of learning, right, for these machine translating, systems, Hindi is abysmal in terms of the number of documents in Hindi. Our regional languages don't have a look in at all. Compare that with a small country like Slovenia that probably has a couple of million people, but they are actually represented way more in Wikipedia, their language. And therefore, the translation to Slovenian languages is better than to any of our Indian languages. Right? And this is a problem. So really, as a country, we need to be investing in data that can help us in providing artificial intelligence-based solutions for the majority of our population that does not speak in English.
So yeah, thank you for that. That was really insightful about, how data is really important. And I tend to agree with you when you say that we don't have that data culture at all in our country, So, and it's been my personal experience also, because even when I was teaching and you want to collect data for some, survey or something, you just don't get it. What you get is always the US data, on that thing. So yeah, I totally agree with you there. All right. So now I think we will take on some questions that came on the Mentimeter, because those were real questions from the audience. And I remember one specific to math. Since you were teaching about how it helps, there are some things that you've done for students through artificial intelligence. So is there any input from your side as to how it can be used in a math classroom? So other than, of course, adaptive learning and, anything else beyond that?
Yeah. So any subject for us to be able to truly, use artificial intelligence, what we are trying to build is a good teacher, right? And that's a tough task, as you all know. So, I mean, if we think in terms of what are the different components that we need to build, the first thing we need to build is what we would call a domain model, right? So in mathematics, because maths is a very concise language, it's easier, I think, in many ways to create a domain model that explains what are the different concepts you need to teach the student. How do they relate with each other, right? Building that kind of model in maths is definitely simpler. And that's why actually some of the early intelligent tutoring systems, as they were called, that came out of Carnegie Mellon and some of the other universities in the US were actually based around teaching mathematics, right? Teaching things like addition, subtraction, multiplication. And because the meaning of the words we use in maths are very, very concise, it's much easier to do. And so a lot of success has been achieved in terms of building some intelligence into software. Now, when we talk about intelligence in software, I think one of the very important things there, once you build a domain model, is to really build a model of the student itself, right? And understanding what does the student understand out of all these concepts. So curating assessments that allow us to diagnose where are the misconceptions when a student makes mistakes, or was that just a click of the wrong button by mistake, all of that kind of stuff is a very important part. And I think again in mathematics, people have been able to have a lot of success. So typically, I mean, I again haven't looked a great deal into all the adaptive learning systems that are there. But I think in maths, typically, there are a number of these systems that are available. And the reason for that is because maths is logical, and therefore we can deal with logic very well within computers, right? The next thing after we diagnose what the problem is, we really need to also then start looking at, well, if they have this misconception, what is the content I can deliver to them for that misconception, right? And we need to track whether the student that is being delivered that content, as we have agreed, or at least I think we had agreed, was the fact that every student has a different way of learning, right? And so what works for me may not work for another student, right? Somebody might be more visual, somebody may be, less so. Somebody may be able to translate mathematical concepts into applications in the real world. Somebody may not be able to, right? And someone may like Greek letters more than other people do, right? And so by tracking how students engage and consume content, we can start to implicitly learn what works for a student and what doesn't work for a student. And if we look at some of the technologies that are out there, like Netflix, we are already understanding how to figure out what the likes and dislikes of a person are, right? By tracking how much of a movie that you decided to watch, you watched, what is the rating you gave, and so on and so forth, right? But to really be able to make a sensible decision after monitoring that, you've got to now understand why Jayashree decided to leave this movie in the middle, right? Or why didn't she even in the first instance choose this movie in the first place, right? Was it the plot? Was it a particular actor that you like? Was it the director? Was it the genre? So life is very multidimensional. And somehow humans tend to be able to navigate those multiple dimensions, right? I mean, all of you teachers are incredibly adept at doing that with your students, and that's why there are students that succeed in life. But these are very hard problems for computers to deal with. And that's why I think, really getting artificial intelligence into the mainstream in teaching, I think we have decades to go before we're really going to be able to do that. But yes, there are tools, like I mentioned, some of the tools that we were developing, right, that enable learning in some way. But I think, unlike radiologists that may lose their jobs in the next 5 to 7 years, I think teaching still is way more complex than that kind of skill. And so I think we are a long way away before tools can really become effective, right? And otherwise, why is it that in Coursera, when you go and join a course, you've got one method, one traversal path, right, for you to go through? Everybody, no matter what your background might be, they're not even trying to figure out what is your competence in something and therefore jump you into the right kind of content, right? And that's what we need to do. Of course, I mean, I would say that a lot of our curriculum in India has been very, very much a well-defined path that every student has to pass through as well. But at least what we see in a lot of international schools and international curricula is the fact that there is this attempt to, in the physical space, identify students and feed them with what they need, on an individual level, to be able to achieve and not get bored from that subject, right? And I think that is the critical piece here, is how do we ensure that a student doesn't get put off a subject because of just not having that level of engagement from a computer.
Yeah, so two things I think I took away from what you said. One is it helps us make learning more personalized and based on the needs of each individual, each student. And another is, I think, about data. So it's not just about the data, it's about how we use that data to kind of, suit the needs of the students.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And one thing that's very important there, Jayashree, and sorry, I think it just struck me right now that I hadn't covered this point, is the fact that the data itself has biases within it, right? And one of the things that is being realized today, at least in the human-computer interaction space, right, where the interfaces, people who are designing interfaces, they actually have a term for this called the weird user. They actually have come to realize that they are, the most interfaces have been created for weird users, which stands for W for Western, E for educated, I for industrialized, R is rich, and D is democratic, right? And so there is a huge bias in the design process for software. And the truth of the matter is that there is a huge bias within artificial intelligence as a result as well. Rich and democratic, Neha. So the problem that we have, and some of us have already faced this in other domains, right? So when I had my first child, I was living in the United Kingdom. And there, when a child is born, you're given this red book that has growth charts saying that your child must be, within these bands, this confidence interval that they have. And if they aren't, you're either abusing your child or you're a terrible parent or whatever it is. And of course, for most Indian parents out there, it's a traumatic experience because those growth charts have been created for Caucasian babies. Caucasian babies are bigger, right? And so, as we saw our child just about keep us out of jail, bumping around, the 95, the percentile, the truth of the matter was that the data that was used to create that chart was biased.
Well, yeah. Okay.
For the Caucasian babies. And the truth of the matter is today, as the Western countries are very good at collecting data, and that data is not fudged numbers, right? like we have, whether it's economic reporting or whatever it might be. The truth of the matter is that they have lots of data assets. They are creating these models, these artificial intelligence systems that are based on their data.
Right.
And there have been use cases, right, where these models have been then used for automatic tagging of images, and Black people have been tagged as gorillas, right? Or they've taken racist data from Twitter and trained a chatbot like Microsoft did, and when they released it into the real world, it became racist very quickly, right? And so it really comes down to how good a teacher does your computer have, right? Because the data is really the teacher telling the computer what things are. And just as a teacher can destroy the life of a child, the same way a teacher can destroy the AI that is created, right? And with the bias that we have in the data, if Indians are going to blindly adopt AI technologies that are developed in the West, it's not going to work. And this is the biggest risk that I think nobody is quite getting right now in the country. That if we don't create our own data, and we don't, whether it is in education or whether it's in healthcare, we are not going to be in a position to be competitive in the world. Because actually, at the bottom line is that artificial intelligence, why is it better than humans? It's better than humans because humans have a limited bandwidth. We are also computing devices, but the amount we can take in through our eyes and our sensors, our ears, and so on is limited. Today, the world is throwing more data at us than we can consume. And so if we humans can't do this, we use computers to actually consume that data and help us, we can optimize all of our decision-making, our processes as a result. And we know from business that if we optimize our processes, we are more profitable. We are going to be more successful. And ultimately, Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest will result in us not surviving, right? If we don't take actions.
Yeah. So, yeah, of course, data helps you to make wise decisions. There's no doubt, whether in business or in education as a teacher, whatever. But then it's eye-opening to know that, the data right now, what we have is biased, and we need to create our own data. That's an important insight. Yeah. So here, Noel has been asking something. So I would suggest, Noel, if you could unmute yourself and speak, because the question says, can you be a little more clear about education versus AI? That is the question that has come up on chat from Noel. Noel, could you unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
So actually, you were talking more about data and about all these things, but how far it can be effective in the artificial intelligence in the education field?
Yeah, so I think it can be very effective if we train it well, right? At the end of the day, AI needs training, just as a child needs training. And so what we need to do here is create the data and provide our interpretation as humans of what the misconceptions are in a student, for example, right? If we want the computer to be able to diagnose that if a student is persistently making these mistakes, then definitely this is the misconception he has or she has. Ultimately, we have to give examples to the computer, right? So if we are not efficient in today as academics and teachers at collecting data and taking the pain to actually diagnosing the student's problem and actually collecting that information along with the data, we are not going to be able to provide data for artificial intelligence to learn from, right? So it's very important for us to realize that artificial intelligence is a friend. It's not a foe. It's not going to be able to take away our jobs. Yes, it may take some jobs, but then humans are very adaptable and we will find other things that make ourselves relevant in society, right? So I don't think we have to see it as a fear. We've got to work with it and recognize that there are limitations today in physical teaching, right? And there are, of course, limitations to what we can do in online teaching as well. Technology has really been thrown into this crazy world that we live in the last 2 years to assist teaching as much as teachers have. And we are both swimming frantically to try and stay afloat. So if we can work together by systematically thinking about how can we collect data at this point, that will allow us, because we have been forced into creating digital data, we can then start using algorithms to make deductions and be able to take over some of the work which is laborious for teachers today to do, right? And so it can definitely be useful. Like I said, to me, adaptive learning, where we can create a personalized path for every child, can only be created at scale if we use digital media and use artificial intelligence to deliver it. We can't do it, in the physical space.
Yeah. So, Sarabjot, just adding to, you said, it makes teachers' lives easy, it makes the work easy for teachers. I think already you have, report cards just getting generated. Teachers just fill in and the report card gets generated. I think even the MCQ questions or the fill in the blanks, which automatically gets corrected and the score given, all that is based on AI, right? So
yes. And actually, I mean, multiple choice questions doesn't even require AI, right? Because ultimately, but if you want to, because that's a clear, the right answer is A, option A, and the student has said A, so that's easy. But if you want to diagnose that if the right answer is A and the student said B, that means the misconception is probably this one.
Right.
That is where AI comes in.
Yeah, right. So what is it basically you do with the data, with the data that you get for the student? So that gives you into, get it.
Correct.
Okay. So are there any other questions, Neha? I would request you to help me, which we could at this point in time ask Sarab. Also, I request the others to keep putting your questions. Thank you, Noel, for that question. So in the meanwhile, when we're getting some more questions, Sarab, so if AI can do so many things, what is it that AI cannot do?
So there are a lot of limitations of AI right now, right? A very important thing for us all to realize is that all of what AI does today is to find correlations between things, right? So it's going to say people who get this wrong as well, right? Or people who like this also like this. But we know that to really be able to make valid decisions and to be confident that those decisions are correct, we actually have to understand not correlation, but causation. What causes this, right? And for that, AI has a long way to go, because AI does not have the common sense knowledge, the general knowledge that we have in a structured form. And until AI can, in a completely unsupervised way, learn from data, we are not going to get there, right? And so today, artificial intelligence needs a teacher. There are some things that have taken place where we call it self-supervised learning, right? Where somehow artificial intelligence is able to find some interesting patterns and conclusions without being told. But if we really wanted artificial intelligence to have an open conversation with us, it can't do it today, right? So if I have a conversation with my friend, I'll jump over all of our space of concepts that we enjoy talking about. Whereas artificial intelligence today is primarily a question answering tool, which is still incredible, right? It can actually understand what you mean by your question and find an answer to give you. Now, there's been a lot of progress in it being able to construct the answer for you. But today, most of these question answering systems actually have a bank of answers that it is using and pulling out of, right? And of course, a few years ago, if you remember how frustrating it was to talk to Siri, and it would keep saying, "Sorry, I don't understand," right? It was because its bank of answers was not great. It was not able to even kind of semantically understand what you were saying, because what you said was not close enough to what it was expecting, right? And things have started to get better in that sense. But we are a long way away from having a contextual, valid, open conversation with artificial intelligence, right? Causality, understanding in scenarios that, one thing with artificial intelligence is it needs to see a lot of examples of something before it can learn and generalize from it. Humans are actually incredibly good, right? You give a child lots of cats that they experience in the real world, and then you create a cartoon of a cat and they know that it's a cat, right? So the generalization is taking place very quickly. So definitely, we are not very good at that. If we give a scenario that the computer has not come across before, right? So if you actually ask artificial intelligence to make predictions about what would happen in the world when a pandemic hit us, we've never had data about a pandemic before. It would not be able to make any sensible conclusions there at all, right? So there's a very basic mathematical requirement of artificial intelligence for it to work today. And that is that the world where the data was created must be the same as the world where AI is making decisions.
Yeah.
If the world changes, then AI is useless, right? And of course, the truth of the matter is that if we are deploying AI in the real world, AI is changing our behaviors. It's changing the world that we are in. So actually, this whole assumption is flawed in itself, right? Because if you think about, how Amazon has changed our perception of what is good customer service, right? Earlier, we thought good customer service was where we walked into a shop and the shopkeeper brought us some mithai or some chai to drink and showed us 3,000 saris or whatever we were looking to buy, right? And that was good customer service. Now our perception of good customer service is Amazon that doesn't have any human face to it. And all it is done is, this whole Amazon experience of ours has changed our own perception of what is important, and that's instant gratification. So what is good customer service? If I can get delivered what I want tomorrow morning, right? And
At my
so
doorstep.
the world has changed. And so if we are building AI based on a different world and expecting it to work in this new world, it doesn't work, right? So I think there's a lot of hype about AI. We are a couple of decades away before we have to start worrying about AI taking over the universe, right? At least, if not more, right? And a lot of people would disagree with me because the hype is out there where we can see this amazing robots coming and destroying us all, or fancy weapons being created that can do face recognition and blow our brains out and all of that kind of stuff at high speed, right? But we are far, far away from really a situation where we have to worry about artificial intelligence. But the reason why people are raising the red flag today is that AI is creating an imbalance. Today, for artificial intelligence to work, you need large volumes of data. Who has that large volumes of data? It's Google, it's Facebook, it's Amazon, right? And a few very powerful organizations, Microsoft, right? And so a lot of these advancements that were earlier happening in universities are now happening in these large 4 tech companies, right? And the fear, of course, that we must all have is that ultimately companies are out there to build profit for their shareholders. And whatever makes profit, they will do that, right? So we have to think about the ethics and regulate the world also. And while a lot of AI folks say, well, we should allow data to be freely available, we've got to think about when we are generating this data, who has access to it, because data is actually very, very powerful.
So ethics becomes really important, profoundly important. I think that as educators, we need to really keep in mind that, that becomes a part of the curriculum, because going ahead, we need citizens who have really good ethics and in place. Thank you for that. And I see two questions from two educators here, one from Sonia and one from Sushma. Sonia, if you could unmute yourself and ask. Sonia asked something about intuition. What role does intuition play?
So if I may just interrupt, Jayashree, there were a couple of questions even on the Mentimeter that we had, which was about the use of AI in the classroom. Of course, one was which you could let us know is what are the courses and institutions that teach AI in India? Like, how could people go about? Pitfalls is, I think, something that we've already kind of addressed. And AI replaces humans. That's also.
That's it. And I think here also on the chat also,
I think a lot about class.
How can we take up AI as a career is one question from someone.
Sure.
And does everyone in the coming generation need to learn coding and AI? So that's all. These are the questions.
So
and
I am.
And there's one from Sushma saying, how can a teacher make the classroom AI ready? And what support does she need from the school leader?
Okay, so if I start with the easy ones first. There's actually a lady here that is in the audience, Supriya, that runs a program called Coding and More, if I'm not wrong. And it's aimed around teaching AI to young kids, right? And making these concepts that mathematicians make very complex, very approachable for students. And I think it's very, very important that kids are, technology savvy for the future. And so the sooner they can get exposed to AI and to coding, I think it's a good thing. I'm, of course, biased, but I feel that coding, knowing how to code, is going to be central for every skill in the future. Whether you are an MBA or you are a software engineer or an engineer working on a shop floor, I have seen very large factories in the US. I'm thinking of the BMW, manufacturing factory based out of the US. I know BMW is German, but still. This large factory that's creating one component of their cars, there were like 5 humans I came across because there's so much automation that's happening there, right? Where even the visual testing of the components after they're created are being done through artificial intelligence and so on, right? So everybody needs to be savvy, not just about coding, but I think about data. So again, I may be biased, but I really feel that every kid needs to realize that enjoying mathematics is very cool today, right? And being able to interpret data, while it was a nerdy thing to do in our generation, it's actually the cool thing to do today. Because if you can't interpret data correctly and make the wrong conclusions, you're setting yourself up for failure, right? So I think these are very, very important skills, and it makes it very important, right? And I'm a strong believer in the fact that most mathematics teachers put students off maths. And so it's a really important skill for teachers to be able to create the joy of maths as something, that sets into a child at a very, very young age. And all of these things are going to become very accessible after that, right? So that's one of the, I think, questions that was asked was, should we start early and should coding be part of it? I definitely think it should. Having said that, I'm going to, be very honest here that I am, not very fond of edtech companies, because unfortunately they are, again, companies, corporates that are trying to make money. They are all fueled by large investments by venture capitalists, and at the risk of, becoming enemy number one for them, I really believe that their focus is not on educating, right? So if we look at some of these institutions that are trying to teach coding, they're doing it the wrong way, right? It's not a factory system where you can give anybody a script, right? And I'm sure as teachers, you would agree that you can't create a good teacher by giving them a script and say, go and teach now on this script, right? So I don't believe anybody in India is teaching AI well, right? There are lots of institutions that are tying up with universities in America and places, charging 6 lakhs, 7 lakhs. I have interviewed so many kids that have spent 6 or 7 lakhs, don't have a clue. And this is a very sad situation for our country, that we are in this situation, that nobody is bothered really about creating the skills that we need in AI. And the truth of the matter is, I read a statistic somewhere and was being interviewed about this, that only 16 or 17% of engineering colleges are teaching AI today. And the question I was asked was, is this ever going to allow us to fulfill our dreams of actually competing with China? And the answer is no. But on the other hand, the issue also is that it's not about the numbers, because to teach AI, we need folks to teach it, right? So you can't just put out a diktat that says every college should teach artificial intelligence. It's going to be like every college should teach computer science. And we know that there are so many engineering colleges where people get degrees in computer science and have never written a program. They've never seen a computer, right? So I think it's not that volume game. We have to focus on the quality of what is being delivered. And the same is true with, in my view, the CBSE saying we've got to teach AI in schools. If we are going to give that to private organizations to go and start teaching AI in whatever way they want to, they're going to be peddling their own technology and hardware. So we have to be careful about that. And I don't believe that, schools are necessarily equipped to suddenly start teaching AI. So we should rather be working on saying, how should AI be taught? And, I'm not plugging for Supriya here, but, the nice thing about what Supriya has done is to go and talk to the MITs of the world and the Stanfords of the world that have spent a lot of time thinking about how do you teach children about artificial intelligence, right? And so I think it's really important that we don't get into this whole cycle of commercializing education in this way, right? I'm sorry, I may be speaking out of turn here, but I really believe that, for AI to be taught, it's not about sitting in a classroom. I want every AI engineer that is produced to actually have been sunburnt standing in a farm, trying to understand how farming is done so that they can create a solution for the farm. And that's what we are trying to do in Subudh. We are not very successful in it, but at least we are trying to go in that direction, where every child that comes in has to choose a passion project. And I have to say, this word passion project I have got from one of the founders of Adhyayan, right? So this is one of Spokey's terms that I have stolen shamelessly and I'm using here. But really, if we can't create passion for AI in our students by actually engaging them and showing them the value of what, what's exciting about this technology and get a glint in their eye for it, we are never going to be successful, right? So once they choose a passion project, then we start thinking about what do we need to teach them. And if we can then start figuring out what we have to teach them so that they can follow their passion, even if we are human curating this, we are creating a personal pathway for them to learn. Nobody in EdTech is doing this. Because it's too difficult. And they want returns quickly, right? So I think that is the problem there. So what were the other questions, Jayashree? Sorry.
Yeah. So
I'd just like to again button here was that there was one question: how can AI help to achieve our SDGs, your Sustainable Development Goals? Yeah. And I think we kind of got the answer from here in terms of who owns the data, where is the data, where do you begin from, who teaches who, do we have competent, teachers, what's your project, what's the task or goal that you're set out to, and then that's right. How you would. So I right. Hope that whoever's put that question also gets that perspective that Saurabh has shared.
Yeah, and I can give you a couple of examples, right? So in Subudh, for example, my foundation, we have a couple of projects, right? One is around farming. So where we are creating IoT devices that are, being placed in farmers, fields, to collect data about the climatic conditions, the moisture levels, and all of that kind of stuff. We are combining that with satellite data, combining that with drones, taking images of the crop, on a daily basis or maybe less frequent basis. Drones that fly at a high level so that they can identify where are the stressed areas of the field. And then drones that fly at a much lower level and get photographs of the plants, if there are insects there, if there is a huge population of weed, right? So analyzing all of that data and helping the farmer understand what are the problems here, right? So that they can actually solve those. Using technology to solve a problem and to create a sustainable, my desire is that if we can convert every village into a medium-sized enterprise where technology supports the farmers in doing what they know best, right? But supporting them with data again, because data is important even in farming. Another project is, there has been a lot of data collection on birds, right? In the West, where they have got these small devices that actually cost nothing, right? One such recording device is, 10,000 rupees or so. You put it out there, it's recording 24/7 bird calls, right? And talking about weird data, we have terabytes of data of bird call data recorded in the West. In India, we've got 0. So we have bought 10 of these devices that we are now putting into areas where reforestation is taking place to understand how does reforestation impact the bird population. And artificial intelligence algorithms are being used there to analyze this data to identify which bird is chirping, right? And by the volume of bird chirps, can we understand what is the volume of that bird in that locality? And as the forest grows, are we getting more migratory birds back? What is the kind of diversity in the in ecology there? How does that impact farming? Right? Because we know that birds are great at keeping some pests away from the farms. Right? So these are complex problems where if we can collect data for all of these, of course we can solve the sustainability development goals.
Yeah, okay.
But to Neha's point, who owns that data? What do we do with that data? How do we protect it from being misused? One of my biggest fears is if we start collecting data in this country, is it going to be misused?
Yeah.
So can I say something over here?
Yes.
Since somebody asked about the UN sustainable goals, by the way, I'm Supriya, what we also do with our children is that once we teach them the AI tools, then we ask them, like you do the passion project, that use these tools and try to solve for one of the UN SDGs. Whatever you strongly believe in or whatever you think matters to your community. And it's been amazing with the simple tools that the universities have made for the children. They're actually able to solve for them. At least, of course, they're not something that you can put out in industry, but the thought process, the problem solving that we want to inculcate in the children, that's getting developed, where they're able to identify a simple problem, whether it's climate action, gender equality, quality education, health, and then they're able to collect data from their own, community, either via Google form or Kaggle, and able to do that. For the schools, in case you all want to take it up as a project. I'm
Correct.
Sorry to butt into your.
Not a problem. I was already pitching for you in some ways, right? So I think, if we can get kids to start at least understanding the sustainability goals, right? And believing that they can make a contribution, I think that is hugely important, right? So definitely, I think, there are two things that we can develop within children. Even, I think if our children start to understand what the problems are and can start thinking about how they would solve it, then I'm sure they would be capable of solving it once they have the skills to create something that is productionizable in the real world. Thanks, Supriya, for bringing that up.
Yeah. So, should we take Sonia's question now? So she asks about what is the role of intuition. So, Sonia, you want to elaborate on your question?
Hi, Jayashree. Hi, Saurabh.
Hi, Sonia.
No, so I think this was a part of the conversation on chat. So we were just talking, but I think I'm good for now. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, you're right. AI is not intuitive, right? I mean, it's not got intuition. It does not have the kinds of emotions that we have and all of those kinds of things. But at the same time, what is very interesting is one of the areas we were working in was in the chatbot space, where we were actually looking at how does a salesperson perceive a human that walks in, right? And the kind of implicit signals that they pick up, how do they use those to actually create a better sales pitch, right? And if we look at AI right now, it's nonsense, right? We can basically get a poor salesperson as an AI, robot. But if we really want AI to be one of our best sales representatives, we have a long way to go, right? We need to understand human drivers for things.
Right. Sushma, could I request you to unmute yourself and speak? Ask your question.
Yes, Jayashree. I was quite interested in knowing that, as a teacher, how should I use AI in my class? And before that, how should I be ready for using it? That is my main concern.
So are you talking about teaching of AI or using
AI?
Sir,
my question is, how do I teach my subject? I'm a biology teacher. Right. So how can I use AI in my class? And what kind of qualification do I require to be able to use AI in my subject?
That's a good question. I would say that I would probably do a bad job of answering it, but what I was referring to earlier was the fact that we've made a lot of progress in natural language, right? And if we actually look at a lot of the advancements that have taken place in adaptive assessments, for example, and so on, that's based around more quantitative kind of responses, right? But if we look at long essay type questions also, I think we are in a place where we can definitely assist in understanding, given a model answer, how does the answer given by the student stack up against that model answer? I think there is definitely work there that can help you in reducing your workload in terms of, assessment, even where we have, open-ended questions or answers, or even essays for that matter, right? To get to a point where we can actually, like I said, identify misconceptions and to be able to provide remedial content, I think we still have work to do. We have done some POCs in that area, or proof of concepts, but I think that it takes a lot of curation on the part of an educator to actually be able to structure their domain, like I said, right? To understand what are the concepts you're trying to teach. How are you going to diagnose what the misconceptions are, build that model of a student on what they're proficient in and what they're not, and be able to then enable a recommendation, not dissimilar to what would happen in Netflix, but recommending content that the student is capable of consuming and understanding what he needs to understand.
Yeah. So for example, I'm talking about, human body. So whether it's human body or animals, dissections are not possible now, in the schools in India, at least. So how do I make my children get nearest to the reality of learning? Instead of going to the lab, of course, which is not possible again due to Corona. And otherwise also, we were not able to handle the animals and their body. So are there some kind of softwares? And if there are, are they available to us? And if they are, do I require some training? That kind of questions are coming in my mind.
So I think if you need training for those, then those softwares are not ready for deployment in education, right? I mean, really, we should really be creating technologies that you can drive a car kind of equivalent. So you don't need to know how a car drives, but are able to use it. In biology, I'm assuming that actually things more like augmented reality and virtual reality might be better technologies to deal with the scenarios you're talking about than artificial intelligence per se. that actually allows you to, in a virtual environment, experience the dissection that you might be doing, right? But I suspect that there are people who would have better answers than that. But yeah, augmented and virtual reality, I think would be more useful there.
Yeah, that seems like fine. Yeah, thank you.
I think Anand, you've been commenting.
Anand has been raising his hand. Yes.
Raise your hand. So would you like to unmute and give your views?
Thanks. Yeah, I was just sort of eager to respond to what Sushma was asking about. Because in not just biology, I think in any subject, there are, and this is something that we've done at the school where I was teaching and sort of managing the academics. There are two parts to getting towards AI. One is to prepare the mindset to look at everything as what is that data I would require in order to be able to get a machine to do this job, right? And so that in a way sort of starts tipping over to the metacognitive side of what most schools just avoid teaching, right? They don't go into the metacognitive things, right? So why did I feel that friend of mine looks unwell, right? Now that if I know, I can go ahead and figure out these are the things you look for to be able to say that your classmate is unwell. Right. So if you look at, again, if it's in biology, whether it's botany or zoology, so you could actually devise games, Sushma, in the sense of like you take the kids around, you get them to identify plant leaves and stuff like that. And then you say, okay, I'm holding a leaf behind my back. What are the minimum set of questions that you would ask me before telling me what kind of leaf it is? Right? And those are kind of mindset developers in the students for them to realize the value of data and pertinent data. Once they have this ability on a day-by-day basis, right from day one, to be able to do this, and the confidence that they can actually sort of mechanize all these kind of things, then once they're at the right age, when they're, or as if it's part of your school curriculum, for them to learn coding and how to actually build, because coding eventually is like teaching them whether you want to teach them English or a second language, a third language, or mathematics. And asking the question whether we should teach them coding is the equivalent of asking, wait a second, I'm a school somewhere in rural Uttar Pradesh, should I be teaching my students English, right? It's your call. If you don't, you're sort of setting them up for a little bit of a difficulty later on. But if you are teaching them coding, they will then realize that all that they would have to do is build a machine that picks an image of a leaf and analyzes these aspects of it. And those are the 10 or the 20 questions that we all play as kids, right? What are those 20 questions? That's just categorization questions, typically, right? So those kind of activities, and it doesn't matter whether it's biology or whether it's teaching a language like Sanskrit or anything for that matter. I think you'd be able to develop the mindset of this sort of identifying data and relevant data to be able to work with the world around. And as I was citing that movie, Big Hero 6 is, I don't know whether other folks on the call watch animation, but if you sit with the kids and watch it, they would love it because it's amazingly entertaining. But there's a lot of stuff that that Big Hero is doing, which is AI based. And then kids you don't need to tell them it's AI. You just tell them, how do you think Big Hero figured it out? And the kids actually have answered the question, which is very interesting. They just know intuitively what to look for.
Mm-hmm.
So what I gather from this discussion is that if I want to use AI in my class, number one, I should be looking for, I should be learning coding, and my children should also learn coding. Second, there should be software which are built around certain kind of observation for certain kind of visualization or understanding. Let's say, as you talked about plants, maybe I'm talking about animal. So if they want to identify an animal, then what are the observation? What is a set of observation they should be making? And it should be fed in a software, and then we are able to reach the success. Is that what we are getting to?
So I would say you don't need to teach them coding if you want to use AI for biology, for example, right? But definitely coding is going to be a skill that's going to be important for everyone in the future. Also, I think if you're wanting them to be able to identify an animal, one animal versus another one, then you don't have to build the software by picking out those features. Artificial intelligence will pick out features and will learn how to classify those. In fact, I think Anand had in one of his points mentioned here in the chat also, where AI makes mistakes is the fact that if there is a bias in the data, right? And AI really doesn't know what is a feature of the animal or a feature of the background. So there was a very iconic study that was done in artificial intelligence, where AI was given images of wolves and huskies, I think. And it was, the scientists were tasked with learning how to discriminate between these two classes. And the neural network got a 99.9% accuracy, right? And everybody was amazed and wanted to know what were the features, right? And for a human, if you were teaching them to discriminate, you'd be identifying certain differences in maybe their nose structure or the teeth in of the different animals or whatever it might be, right? And when they looked at trying to explain what the artificial intelligence had learned, they saw that actually artificial intelligence had picked up, the neural network had picked up the background, right? So if it was snow, it was a husky. If it was wooded area, it was a wolf, right? And so it had made a completely incorrect, assessment of those two classes of animals. And so one of the big areas of research today is to be able to explain why artificial intelligence is making the decision that it had to make. So it's not necessary that what artificial intelligence today learns to discriminate between two classes of animals would be exactly what a human would use to make that distinction. And I think that's where the two things have to come together. If we can get a mechanism with which artificial intelligence is able to pick out features just as a human would, it would actually create more belief in artificial intelligence systems and trust for a human in terms of what is happening within the artificial intelligence system.
Okay, so we just have a last 1 or 2 minutes left. So one final question to you, Sarab. So do you think artificial intelligence is going to really change education, maybe say 20 years from now or 25 years from now? So what is
I would hope so. I would hope so, right? I think there are too many kids in the world that don't have access to good education. And to scale education, we need to use technology. And we know that a good teacher is worth their weight in gold. And we just don't have enough good teachers because for whatever reason, we don't even promote it, right, as a profession in this country and actually in most of the world. And so if we really want every child to be able to blossom in the way they are capable of, because I don't think any child is born different from another one, right? Yes, there might be some genetic kind of issues that people have, but I truly believe that it's our experiences that make us what we are. And so if we can use artificial intelligence, we have the capability of unlocking what is a huge resource that has been ignored today in our country and maybe the world over, right? And children that are completely being wasted, by not having access to education and having the capabilities, shone by the education that kids in cities may have access to.
Okay. So I think on that positive note, that let's hope that AI really, is used in education to let's leverage the power of AI, to personalize learning, to make it, easier for teachers doing the mundane stuff, but rather than really looking into data and seeing how we can use the data to, again, help children blossom. So I think, thank you so much, Sarabjit, for taking out time. We are exactly on time today. Let's conclude the session. And thank you, really. I know you've been busy, so that's what I've heard from Neha, that you're really busy. And thank you really for taking out time and for all your insights. And thank you to the audience. I know, in spite of a very busy weekend, a festive weekend, thank you for joining us. And this really shows that we want to really reach out to our students in the best way possible, I think. So on a Saturday afternoon, when you can forego your family time, you can forego your afternoon nap, you can also forego your festivities at home and join us on this platform. So it shows the passion that we have as educators. Thank you so much. We hope to see you again a fortnight from now, and you will be receiving the invite and the posters on social media. You will know what is the next topic. So hoping to see you. Thank you so much. Yeah.